a grabarlo, ¿ok? Para que lo vean los más chicos. Ok, now let's compartir, share. Now I'm gonna show you some videos about the topic that we are about to see next week. Okay, next week. This is as introduction.
Teacher, so in the weekend we have to do the assessment and the vocabulary.
Pay attention, okay?
With the start of the Sumerian civilization, daily life in Mesopotamia began to change. Prior to the growth of cities and large towns, people lived in small villages and most people hunted and gathered. There wasn't a lot of variety in jobs or daily.
Descano, can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
Daily life. With the growth of large cities, things changed. There were all sorts of jobs and activities. While many people still worked as farmers in the country, in the city, a person could grow up to work in a number of different jobs such as priest, scribe, merchant, craftsman, soldier, civil servant, or laborer. With people moving to towns and governments being formed, society was dividing into different classes of people for perhaps the first time. At the top of society was the king and his family. The priests were considered near the top as well. The rest of the upper class was made up of the wealthy, such as high-level administrators and scribes. Below the upper class was a small middle class made up of craftsmen, merchants, and civil servants. They could make a decent living and could work hard to try and move up in class. The lower class was made up of laborers and farmers. These people lived a harder life, but could still work their way up with hard work. At the bottom were the slaves. Slaves were owned by the king or bought and sold among the upper class. Slaves were usually people who were captured in battle. Most people lived in mud brick homes. They were rectangular in shape and had 2 to 3 levels. The roofs were flat, and people would often sleep on the roofs during the hot summers. The mud brick worked as a good insulator to help to keep the homes a bit cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. As the cities of Mesopotamia grew wealthy, there were more resources and free time for people to enjoy entertainment. They enjoyed music at festivals, including drums, lyres, flutes, and harps. They also enjoyed sports such as boxing and wrestling, as well as board games and games of chance using dice. The children of the time would have had toys to play with, such as tops and jump ropes. Art and poetry was a big part of the wealthier cities. Most of the poetry and art had a religious theme or honored the king of the city. Storytellers would have passed stories down over generations, with some of the more popular stories eventually being written down on clay tablets by scribes. Clothing was typically made from sheepskin or wool. The men wore kilt-like skirts, and the women wore longer dresses. They enjoyed wearing jewelry, especially rings. The women braided their long hair, while the men had long hair and beards. Both men and women wore makeup.
What's the other one?
Astronomy.
law. The story of civilization itself begins in one place. Not Egypt, not Greece, not Rome, but Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is an exceedingly fertile plain situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. For 5 millennia, this small strip of land situated in what is today Iraq, Kuwait, and Syria fostered innovations that would change the world forever. Inhabited for nearly 12,000 years, Mesopotamia's stable climate, rich soil, and steady supply of fresh water made it ideal for agriculture to develop and thrive. About 6,000 years ago, seemingly overnight, some of these agricultural settlements blossomed into some of the world's first cities. In the period between 4000 and 3100 BC, Mesopotamia was dotted with a constellation of competing city-states. At one point, they were unified under the Akkadian Empire and then broke apart, forming the empires of Assyria and Babylon. Despite near constant warfare, innovation and development thrived in ancient Mesopotamia. They built on a monumental scale, from palaces to ziggurats. Mammoth temples served as ritual locations to commune with the gods. They also developed advanced mathematics, including a base 60 system that created a 60-second minute, a 60-minute hour, and a 360-degree circular angle. The Babylonians used their sophisticated system of mathematics to map and study the sky. They divided one Earth year into 12 periods. Each was named after the most prominent constellations in the heavens, a tradition later adopted by the Greeks to create the zodiac. They also divided the week into 7 days, naming each after their 7 gods, embodied by the 7 observable planets in the sky. But perhaps the most impactful innovation to come out of Mesopotamia is literacy. What began as simple pictures scrawled onto wet clay to keep track of goods and wealth developed into a sophisticated writing system by the year 3200 BC. This writing system would come to be called cuneiform in modern times and proved so flexible that, over the span of 3,000 years, it would be adapted for over a dozen different major languages and countless uses, including recording the law of the Babylonian king Hammurabi, which formed the basis of a standardized justice system. But Mesopotamia's success became its undoing. Babylon, in particular, proved too rich a state to resist outside envy. In 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon and sealed his control over the entirety of Mesopotamia. For centuries, this area became a territory of foreign empires. Eventually, Mesopotamia would fade, like its kings, into the mist of history, and its cities would sink beneath the sands of Iraq. But its ideas would prevail in literacy, law, math, astronomy, and the gift of civilization itself.
This is the last one, guys.
First civilizations began on a wide, flat plain between 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. These rivers flow from the mountains in present-day Turkey to the Persian Gulf. In ancient times, this area was called Mesopotamia. The name Mesopotamia comes from a Greek word that means land between the rivers. Mesopotamia is part of a larger region called the Fertile Crescent. This land stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The Fertile Crescent is where the first farming communities were developed. According to many scholars, a group of people known as Sumerians migrated to Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. The land they settled in became known as Sumer. Mesopotamia offered the Sumerians fertile soil for farming, which made the area good for planting crops and developing a society. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers carried a fine, fertile soil called silt down from the surrounding mountains. Each year, the rivers flooded and then carried the silt across the Mesopotamian plain. When the flood waters receded, the silt settled into the soil and a layer of moist, rich earth was left behind for planting. However, there were also many challenges that the Sumerians faced. The floodwaters that brought the silt from the mountains also brought danger. Sometimes there would be heavy flooding and entire villages would be swept away. Another challenge the Sumerians faced was drought. The land beyond the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers was desert. During the summer, the ground was baked rock hard by the hot sun, and the lack of rain would cause plants to wither and die. Additionally, strong winds would blow from the mountains and whip up dust and sand that would form into gritty clouds that turned day into night. Despite the challenges the Sumerians faced, they were able to turn Mesopotamia into a productive farmland by developing two new agricultural techniques for growing food. The first technique was irrigation. The Sumerians dug many miles of irrigation canals to carry water from the rivers to their fields during the long, hot, dry summer months. Irrigation canals allowed them to plant crops far from the rivers. The other technique that the Sumerians developed was a new way of preparing the ground for planting by using the plow. Before the invention of the plow, Sumerians had to use digging sticks to poke holes in the ground and then drop seeds into the holes one by one. This technique was very hard, slow work. At first, the Sumerian farmers pushed the plow along the ground and dug long, shallow furrows or trenches in the ground. It was much easier to drop seeds into the furrow than into small holes. Later, the farmers began hitching oxen to the plows and having the animal pull the plow along. An oxen-powered plow could prepare much more land for planting than a farmer using a digging stick. As the agricultural techniques improved, the Sumerians were able to produce a food surplus. With a dependable food supply, the population began to increase, and villages that started as just a few mud huts grew into towns of neat mud brick houses. Around 3000 BC, the first cities emerged. Uruk was one of the first cities and had a population of about 40,000 people. Soon, other cities such as Ur, Lagash, Sippar, Nippur, and Babylon emerged and joined Uruk as the first Mesopotamian communities. As cities grew in size, they became powerful city-states. A city-state is made up of the city and the surrounding land and villages that it controls. Each city-state had its own government, laws, and gods that it worshipped. Each city-state was also a center of trade. Mesopotamia was rich in fertile soil and produced a surplus of food, yet it lacked wood, stone, and metals. Sumerian traders began to travel to far lands to find these resources and bring them back to their cities. Two advances made travel to far lands possible. The first was the development of wheeled carts. The second was the development of sailing ships. Both of these advancements meant that Sumerian traders could transport their surplus grain and wool over long distances. They could then bring back heavy resources such as lumber, metal, and precious stones. Wheeled carts and sailing ships gave Sumerians access to products that were not produced in Mesopotamia. Most trade was done through a process called bartering. Bartering is a trading system in which people exchange goods without using money. By bartering surplus food supplies, Sumerian city-states grew in wealth and power. Mesopotamia, or the land between the rivers, was home to the world's first civilizations. The Sumerians developed new agricultural techniques that allowed them to produce a surplus of food. In turn, this allowed the Sumerians to develop the first cities and city-states. Mesopotamia will long be remembered as the mother to all future civilizations.
Okay, guys, that was it. That was it. Your camera on, please. Your camera on. Turn on your camera. Okay, guys. Now. Okay, you have the privilege. You have the privilege of being the first one. The first class that has this kind of introduction. Okay.
Okay.
You are ahead. You are going ahead. of classes, okay? So now you have seen already what we are about to see next week. Okay, now, if you have, now open your books on page 66. 66.
Teacher, and the key term that you said that we had to do? 66.
Now that is the topic that we are about to start next week. Now you have to write in your notebook, write the title, Geography of the Fertile Crescent. Write in your notebook with today's date, write in the notebook, Geography of the Fertile Crescent. Now, the next line, you have to write vocabulary. Yeah, vocabulary. And then you have to write the words that are over there in the key terms of...
Teacher, espérese. Repita la indicación, por favor. Gracias. Can you repeat the indication, please? Thanks.
Practicando el inglés.
You need to write that title in your book, in your notebook.
What page? Page
66. Page 66. Open your book and then write in your notebook, write the title. Geography of the Fertile Crescent. Write it in your notebook. Then you have to write the vocabulary. The vocabulary is over there. It says the first word is Fertile Crescent. Word number 2, silt. Word number 3, civilization. Word number 4, irrigation. Number 3, canals. And number surplus. And the last one, division of labor, is on page 66. You have to write that. That is the vocabulary that belongs to that. Okay.
Okay, and the assessments on page.
Hold on, yes. And the next, after you complete that vocabulary, then you're going to do the assessment, okay?
All the assessment, teacher?
You have to do everything in order. Everything in order. First,
Okay.
then the vocabulary.
Teacher, tengo una pregunta. I have a question. ¿Cuáles son los además, o sea, usted hoy está mandando a hacer pero ¿cuáles son los vocabularios que teníamos que hacer anteriormente? Usted había mandado.
Okay, the previous one, oh, you're talking about the beginning of the agriculture.
Ok, usted primero había mandado a hacer el vocabulario de...
This one.
Beginnings of the culture, ok. Ese
We finished
también,
already yesterday.
ok. Y también mandó a hacer el que dice beginning, no sé si. Hay
Yes.
otro que acá detrás de ese, ahí dice que es que early human immigration. Ese también tenemos que hacerlo.
Sí.
Con assessment y vocabulario.
Sí. Entonces hay que hacerlo con assessment y vocabulario.
Ok, era para ponerme en corriente. Gracias.
Okay. Okay, now let's go back to what I was explaining. Okay, now, okay, then you have to write the title, the vocabulary, as on page 66. And now I'm going to give you which are the questions that you need to answer in that assessment, okay? Now, the assessment of this one, the geography of the Fertile Crescent, the assessment is on page 69. Everybody, page 69. Page.
Wait, teacher, I'm right.
Page 69. Here. Now you need to resolve question number 1. Pregunta 1. Letter A and B. Subrayenlo. Subrayen la que tienen que hacer. Pregunta número 1, letra A y B. Subrayenlo. La C también. En la 1 subrayen la pregunta 1, A, B y C. Pinilla.
¿En qué parte, teacher? No lo encuentro.
Página 69, 69,
Assessment.
página
Assessment.
69.
Ok.
Page 69.
69, sí. Subrayen las preguntas que van a contener el assessment, ¿ok?
Teacher, yo les puse un circulito.
Ok, no importa, ¿ya?
Ok.
Entonces la 1, hacen
La
la 1,
uno.
A, B y C. ¿Ya?
A, B y C son las que
Ajá.
hacemos de la número 1.
Es la número 1. Después, la número 2, hacen la A y la B.
¿Nada más?
Ya, eso es todo.
Ok, y la 3.
No, la 3 no, yo no he dicho la 3.